Well, once again we meet, and today we are on Greek class lesson 7. And lesson 7, in my opinion, is not exactly the easiest lesson in your book for us to do. If you're following along with the book, you want to be on page 33, and you'll notice up at the top it says Aorist tense. Aorist tense, and it says that we're working with the active and the middle voices. And of course we're working in the indicative mode. And notice that we're not working with the passive. Whenever we did present, we worked with present, active, middle, and passive. And then whenever we moved on to the imperfect, we worked with imperfect, active, middle, and passive endings. But when we moved to the future, remember we just worked with the active and middle and said we would cover that later. And here we are today, we're covering the aorist tense, and we're going to work with the active and middle, but not the passive, or not the future. Not the passive ending. The passive we'll learn later. So as we cover this, and you'll have to kind of hang with me because this is a little different, and unfortunately in this lesson we're not just going to cover aorist, but we're also going to cover second aorist. And that's probably what makes this lesson difficult. It's just seems like covering a lot of ground in one lesson. But aorist tense is point action in the indicative mode. And basically we would show that as we would see a period there. Now in other places in your book you've seen a linear action showed by a line. If it was a linear action to a point, it was showed by a line and point. Well, with aorist tense, we just see that as one period there, a point action, a snap of the fingers. And there's many times in the New Testament that we see the aorist tense used. And we want to be able to sense that whenever something happens, whenever Paul says, you were washed, you were sanctified, you were justified. Whenever he says those things, washed, aorist tense, sanctified, aorist tense, justified, aorist tense, happened at a point in time. Is what he's showing us, that these things took place. So we want to be able to see that. And this is a tense that is not in English. Okay, so how do we translate that in English? Well, if we were using the simple statement "I say," if it was in aorist tense, it would be "I said." Okay, and that's how in English we would try to show that point action. Very difficult to keep in your mind looking in the English. The best way to tell an aorist tense is to go back to the Greek and look at that Greek and tell. So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at some endings here of this. Now we're going to do singular, and we're going to do plural. And what we want to do here is just, first of all, I want to write these down for you. I'll put a 1, a 2, and a 3 there, and a 1, a 2, and a 3 there, just like we always do basically. But this time it's saw, and then we want to remember that the first one would be I, of course. You know, nothing's changing over what you've done in the past, but we're just, you know, and this is going to look a little different to you. And here in just a few minutes I'll try to clarify that. Okay, the next one is saws. Okay, and then we move on to se, and then we go to saw, men, okay, and then we go down to saw, te, and then the last one that we've got is son. Okay, and whenever you see those, the best way I think to memorize these is saw, saws, se, salmon, seta, or sata, son. It's not exactly easy, I know, to even come out with it on your tongue. But these are the active that we're dealing with right here. Endings in the aorist. Saw, saws, se, samen, sata, san. Whew, boy, those are kind of tough. Okay, so you want to kind of get those on your tongue and start trying to use them. Saw, saws, se, samen, sata, san. Okay, and you can maybe. It's really hard to come up with those endings. You can kind of notice this. We've had the almond before, and if you look at that, you can see that ending right there. And we've had almond eta, and we've got ata there. So something similar. So they do kind of remain in a similar form. But the sign of the aorist tense. There's a couple of things to notice. But the first one is that sigma alpha that you see. That is the sign that we're going to look for on those verb endings of the aorist tense. And you might notice, I know right off you're spotting out and you're saying, well, that's not always true, Darren. And that is true that there are, in the third person singular, it doesn't have the sigma alpha there. You just need to be aware of that. But notice that everywhere else in the active we see that sigma alpha. So that's our sign, that's our clue in. And if you remember well from last week, whenever we worked with future, the sign of the future was just the sigma. Now the good thing is about the aorist, there's one more thing that makes it noticeable. I'm going to take these down for just a second. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our old good friend Luo. And we are just going to take that word and write it in its form as it would be in singular and plural. So I'm going to put it up here for you. And I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to use a black marker and a green marker to help show some differences here. Alright, now let's switch to a blue marker here. Oh, that's going to show up real good. Alright, now, right off, by looking at these, there's one thing I haven't told you about that you're probably already noticing. And that's that we have the epsilon in front of those, but what that's really telling us is, you remember in imperfect, whenever it was shown in past tense in the indicative mode, we had that same thing, and we called that an augment. An augment. So basically, because aorist tense in the indicative mode shows past action, we see that augment there with it. So not only do you get the opportunity to look for the sigma and alpha, but also you look for the augment. And whenever you see the augment and the sigma alpha, plus obviously the endings there, you would know that this is the aorist tense that we're looking at here. So let's think about these, and if you will, be looking at your book here underneath 31 on page 33. Elusa, elusa, and what would we say for that? We would say I loosed. Okay, that would be how we would show aorist tense. I loosed. I did it at a point in time. It was done, over, not anything continuing. Remember, the imperfect just shows something being done in the past, but doesn't show a start, doesn't show an ending. It just shows it was done in the past. And a perfect tense, if you remember, and we'll be looking at that real soon, shows that it was started at a point in time and had an ending point to it. It was, it showed linear action to a point, or In the indicative, most of the time, it shows a point that it started and then linear action continuing into the future. So, or continuing into the present, I should say. So here we have, this shows point action, and that would be I loosed. And obviously this one here would be you loosed. And this one here would be he loosed. And you guys can follow along in your book here if you have one. And this one here would be we loosed, ye loosed, and they loosed. Okay, so not too difficult. Just a matter of remembering exactly what it is. So let me just to kind of reinforce this here a little bit. I loosed, and this would be you loosed, and this would be he, or it could be he, she, or it loosed. All right, over here we would have we loosed, and then we would have ye, because we want to show that plural of you, loosed. And here we would have they, loosed. Alright, so there you have it. That is the aorist tense, active, indicative, singular and plural, and put into the word luo there using. So it's saw, saws, se, salmon, sata, son. So not exactly easy, but I believe you can do it. Okay, now we're going to erase that, and we're going to go from active, and we're going to put up middle. Alright, and obviously we're going to have to get rid of all these here for the time being. And let's get this here off the board. Okay, and if you kind of pick up with me at the bottom of page 33 there, it kind of goes on into the other page, but you can begin to see these middle and passive endings and what I'm doing, and then on page 34 you can see them well. So let me get them up here on the board, and these are middle and passive. We'll do the singular first. Alright, my alpha is still really sloppy. Looks like I got my spelling pretty good down on these, kind of checking myself here. So, we got saw main, so, saw ta. Sometimes I'll say saw two just to say it real quick, but that's not accurate. So sometimes you'll catch me even in these lessons doing that. Saw ta, saw metha, saw sesta. Ooh, boy, that's tough. Saw sesta. Okay. Saw non-ta. Okay. The good thing is about this, and this is in the middle, is you've actually seen something similar. Remember the endings main, u, atu, metha, esta, onto? Remember those that we worked with? And what lesson did we work with those in? I believe that was in the imperfect lesson, right? Where we found those. Main, u, atu, metha, esta, onto. And that was the imperfect, and it was middle and passive. Well, notice if you remember, if you memorized those in the imperfect, then look at these. Main, ata, metha, sesta, onta. They're real similar there, okay? So it's sa main, so, sa ta, sa metha, sa sta, sa non-ta. So they're similar there in what they are. And notice once again, in most cases, the sigma alpha is represented there. The only one it isn't is the second person. So we saw one of those on the others. But those are the middle and endings. And obviously we could do that again here with these words and try to make them into complete words. Let me do that here with at least the first one to show you exactly how that would be. Okay, we elu, and then we would change. Let me go to a blue marker here, and we would have to have that sigma and the alpha, then main. Okay, so it's elusamain. Elusamain. And what would that mean? Elusamain. Think about it. It's in aorist tense. It's in middle. So we would say that I what? Okay, I loosed. And since the action is middle, that means it's done to herself. I loosed myself. Now, you and I both know that I loosed myself really doesn't make much sense at all whenever we say it. But that's okay, because we're just learning how this would be defined and understanding the action, not necessarily something that we would go around saying all the time. I loosed myself. But whenever we see that a word, whenever we look at, is in an aorist tense in its middle and its first person, we would understand better in the Greek, looking at our scriptures, of what exactly kind of action was going on here. So hopefully here you understand a little bit about these endings. So this is something you want to look at your homework and look at the book and do your best to try to understand. Well, the next thing we want to do is look at the vocabulary words. And we'll kind of take a break from learning those endings for a few minutes, and we'll pick up with those again in a little while. But let's look at our vocabulary words here this time. Seems like we're getting a little bigger words, some maybe more complicated to say. But we come up with the first one, and curiuo. Kind of hard to say, curiuo. And that word means I am Lord, I lord over. Okay? I am Lord. Now you may have learned another word, or heard another word called kurios. And that word means Lord. You're very familiar with that from the New Testament. But kuriuo, that means I am Lord, or I lord over. Okay? Thaumazo. Thaumazo. And thaumazo means I marvel. Okay, thaumazo, I marvel. Keluo, keluo. And keluo means I command. Keluo. This one here is very difficult. If you have two gammas that come together, they make an ng sound, an ng. It's just naturally the way you're going to say that. Otherwise, your tongue just will not go in that many directions. So similar to that is this gamma chi. Whenever they come together, this word would be said elinko. Elinko. And I realize it doesn't look anything like that, but try to say it any other way. Okay? Elinko. And elinko means I convict. I convict, or I find fault. That's what that means. Elinko. All right, the next one down here I think you will be familiar with, though. Katharidzo. Katharidzo. We better say it like that. Katharidzo. The reason I want to say katharidzo is because that, whenever we talk about katharidzo, this means, or katharidzo, it means I make clean. And obviously it has an English connection with that English word for catheter that's used there. Alright, chi, a little simple word, and this is a conjunction. It's our first conjunction. No, I think we actually learned something last week, didn't we? But it means and, even, or also. Most of the time that word is translated and, okay? And it's a very popular word in the Greek New Testament. Okay? Namadzo. Namadzo means I suppose or I think. Okay, I suppose or I think. Namazo. Prazo. Prazo means I do or practice. I do or practice. Prazo. Monthano is what you're doing now. I learn. Monthano. I learn. Scandalazo. Scandalazo. Scandalazo or scandalizo simply means, it basically means I cause to stumble. And you can obviously connect that with a scandal, and a scandal would certainly cause someone to stumble. Sparo, sparo. It means I sow or scatter seed. I sow or scatter seed. Sparo. The next one here is elpidzo, and elpidzo means I hope, or I have hope. Then we run down to these three at the bottom here, and to me they're fairly easy. Basically, they mean no. They are a negative. Oo, ook, and ook all show a no or a negative. And if you read in your book here, the first one there, it's not, okay, written as not, and ook is before a vowel, and ook before a rough breathing. The negative will normally be written before the word it negates. So, it's kind of a bonus there. You get three words that mean the same thing, and they're pretty simple to remember. So, basically, we'll go through them once again. Remember, the simplest way to do this one is remember that word kurios for Lord. Kuriuo, I am Lord. Thaumazo, I marvel. Keluo, I command. Elinko, I convict. Katharidzo, I make clean. Kai, and even also. Namazo, I suppose. Prazo, I do. Monthano, I learn. Scandalazo, I cause to stumble. Sparo, I sow. Elpidzo, I hope. And ook and ook means no. Alright, so take your time. You definitely want to be working on those vocabulary words. Fill out those index cards and use those every day to study. And you're beginning to develop quite a vocabulary here as we work through these. This is one part of the class that I have to apologize before we even start into it, because I wish we didn't have to bring it up today, but it's in our lesson book for this lesson, and we really need to cover it, and I do think it complicates everything. We're going to learn about something called the Second Aorist. Okay? Now, for is how it is defined. In other words, what is a Second Aorist? It is exactly the same as aorist tense. Aorist tense means point action. Second Aorist means point action. The difference is the Second Aorist is not defined by the sigma alpha and the augment. It kind of has a mind of its own. Well, that's not really fair to say about the augment, but these words you're going to see, they have a mind of their own, and they use different endings. They use endings, though, that you have seen before. On, es, amen, et, on in the active. And we saw those in the imperfect, right? Okay, whenever we did the imperfect, you already learned these endings. So the endings you're well familiar with. The problem is that only certain words are second aorist. Now, if a word is a second aorist, it is not a regular aorist. In other words, it will never take on the form of the sigma alpha with the augment. You won't see it as a regular aorist. It's either a second aorist or it's an aorist. It has to be one of the two. So, if you look in your book, on page 34 and 35, at the bottom, under section 34, you will start to see a list of words that are second aorist that we have already studied. And you will see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 words already that we have studied fall into the category of Second Aorist. And these words, that basically make up about one lesson's worth of words out of all the words that we've learned so far. So you can see that there are several that Second Aorist. But the only way I can really do this is to give you an example here of a word that's Second Aorist. And we're going to use the word lambano. Alright, lambano. It's spelled correctly there. Now, the word lambano meant I take or receive, right? I take or receive. Well, lambano is a Second Aorist, and a Second Aorist works off what's called the shortened stem. And that's where it gets confusing. So basically, the word lambano in the shortened stem form would look like this. Something like that. Actually, not even with that ending on there. The shortened stem of lambano and Second Aorist looks something like that. Lob. So, notice that we lost our mu there, and we lost alpha and the nu, so this can get complicated. So let me get rid of lambano. Let me get this up here where you can see it. And we're going to erase this set of endings right here, because that part I feel pretty good about you already knowing. And we're going to write up here the first in a Second Aorist, and that would be El Laban. Now it's not hard to say El Laban. The problem is that this is the Second Aorist, and that is the on ending there. So, you know, the first thing you might think back to is, okay, Darren, well, how do I tell the difference between this and the imperfect that we work with? Well, this is what an imperfect would look like. If it was this word right here. Okay? Oops, actually I missed a letter there. Now I get it right. Okay? This would be the form of the imperfect. The difference is, obviously all the letters are here versus the aorist tense has just got some of the letters. So it's not that hard to tell the difference between the imperfect and the aorist. The problem is, unless you basically go and memorize a lot of these aorists, you just simply, you'll find a word that you can't find any matches for, and you'll think, well, what is that word? And the only thing you really do is your mind is say, okay, it must be a Second Aorist. But you can look there and see the list on how we would do those. So let me go ahead and finish this out. This 3. And I have to say that I think it's difficult. It's just, you know, I like things that are in some kind of an order, and it's not that these endings aren't in order. It's just that they just throw everything out of whack in how you're trying to learn. Okay, so there they are up on the board. We'll try to say them. El Laban, El Labes, El Labe, El Labamin, El Labaeta, El Laban again. The first and the third are the same. I don't know that saying them is so difficult as it is just to remember that this particular word happens to be a second aorist. And in my opinion, the easiest thing that you're going to do is simply to memorize those. Now, if we move from active to middle, and moving from active to middle, we'll get rid of all this, and we have singular and plural. And if you're following in your book, I want you to look on page 35 at the bottom there, and we see the endings are main, and then we have u, ta, and then we have the plural forms, and that is ooh, boy, I got carried away that time, didn't I? That's no letter. Metha. And then we have, I'm just getting really messed up here. Obviously, that's a 1, and that's a 2, and that's a 3. Then we have Estha, and then we have Anta. So in the second aorist middle, main, u, ita, ametha, esta, anta. And once again, that part you're familiar with. You have learned those endings. You just have to remember that this is the second aorist, and this is the middle, and the others are the active. And I realize that basically whenever after this class, you're going to say, well, wow, Darren took us through a set of endings for the aorist in active and middle, and then he turned around and took us through a set of endings for the second aorist in active and middle. And I apologize for that, but we could break up the lesson into two. But the one thing is about this is you kind of have a clue in already, because we're building on top of what you've already learned. So it's just a matter, some of this you don't even have to memorize, you just have to remember what it is and what it's talking about. So there it is in the second aorist. Now your homework today is going to be a combination of both things. It's going to have some aorist and it's going to have some second aorist. But if you look on page 36, I want you to do 1 through 11 of these. 1 through 11. Not 1 through 10, because we would just miss a great one there if we just went 1 through 10. We want to go 1 through 11 there. All right. Just for example here, let's put one up on the board. Let's put number 17 up on the board out of your homework and see if we can do this. I'm going to have to put some of this over here. Okay, I've written number 17 up on the board out of your homework here. I thought we would try one just to kind of help you out. And we want to go over this. A da amen, and I realize my writing's a little sloppy. I apologize for that. A da amen, hati, uk, epipraza. Epipraza. And I don't have my accent marks up here like I did, but that's okay, you get the picture. Now, I wanted to help you do this, and I think this is where it starts becoming a little fun to make some sentences here. But we have hati, and we know that word, remember, meant that or because. And let's use the word that for now. Okay, so let's write that up there. And what about uk? We know that's a negative, so we'll just write not over that. And we know that usually, if this word is written before the word, it negates, so it's going to negate this word right here, whatever that is. So this a da amen, let's start with it. Now, first of all, we see that it's probably got an augment there, and it's got this ending amen. Now, it's either going to be an imperfect, an aorist, or a second aorist, because that's all we've studied, and that's all that we know that has that augment. Now, whenever we look at this, I want you to realize that if it was an aorist, it would have to have the sigma alpha. And you would also know, even though you just did study the lesson, that we don't have an ending like that. But I bet you can recognize that this is a first person plural ending, can't you? Because you've seen that before in the first person plural. And since we just talked about it, you did see this in the second aorist. And certainly it's not going to match. The augment is there for the imperfect, but the ending doesn't match for any imperfect ending. So what we have here is a second aorist form. Now in this second aorist form, I think the best thing for us to do is to go to our list on pages 34 and 35 of the words we've covered in second aorist. And guys and gals, I realize this is difficult to believe, but this word is blepo. That's where we started out with IC. And this adon is what it changes to, and it means that I saw. So here we've got it here, and we're going to do that in second aorist. And we want to do we saw that not. What is this one right here? All right. Well, once again, it's either an imperfect or it's an aorist or it's a second aorist. Notice the augment tells us that. And then we look over here and we see that sigma alpha. Now, that's a clue in that we're dealing with an aorist. And remember, it was saw, saws, se. So it's a first person is what it is, singular. And we've got our root word here through here, playros. Or play, and one thing I want you to remember, whenever we deal with the future, remember the different things that happen to put the sigma there? On some words, certain letters would combine, and then we would have a different letter form. Well, one of those was, or one of the things that was there, if the sigma met up with another sigma, basically it left one sigma. So that's what we've had happen. So our root word there, our root word, I believe, is plerazo. And that plerazo meant I do or I practice. And I think for the sake of this illustration, we're going to use practice. That would be in the first person. And we're going to do an aorist, so I practiced. Now, I practice. Okay, we saw that not I practice. I practiced. So since this negates this one, the word here, this is the one it negates, it would basically mean we saw that I didn't practice. Okay, that's what's being said here because it's a negative. So, you know, we've got a little sentence here that was able to form, and I think that's really neat. And whenever you get done with those first 11 and do all 11, and that homework is the key. And I realize this was a lot to cover in one lesson. Could have split it up maybe in two. But it was in one lesson in the book, and I felt like you guys were capable of handling this. And, you know, it's difficult, especially second aorist. But you can do this, and I'll see you next week.